Great. Well, welcome everybody to this week's exciting webinar. I'm joined by archaeologist Lydia Dehaven of the Monticello Field Office of the Bureau of Land Management over in southeastern Utah. And tonight she's going to be presenting a talk called A Jaunt Through Time, A Cultural Context of Southeastern Utah. But before we get started, there's a couple introductory slides I want to go through to kind of help us get acclimated to this format of a webinar, even though I know a lot of folks have already been part of these over the last year. So first, I just want to say thanks so much to our viewers. You really make this webinar possible and this whole series, and you really make a difference when you tune in, when you like our page on Facebook or on YouTube. That adds up all those likes, and we get all this social media clout. But beyond that, just tuning in really has made this possible. It's become this really great series because of it over the last year. Crow Canyon is putting on this particular webinar series, and we are a nonprofit, so we really appreciate if you could consider giving us a donation, and that would help fund this series for the rest of the year and beyond. And just this week, we found out a Crow Canyon trustee has made a $50,000 challenge match for the entire year of 2021. So every dollar that you contribute in support of the Discover Archaeology webinar series will be matched up to $50,000. So that's really, really cool. And we really appreciate this particular trustee making this incredible match. So please, donate if you can. A little background on Zoom. I know a lot of us have been using this for quite a while for all sorts of teaching and education and business, but if you haven't, give you a little bit of background and a little bit of info on how you can enrich your viewing experience. So at least for me, in the upper right of my screen is usually where it starts. We have these little talking heads. You can see me waving my hands. Oh, there's Lydia too. And you can actually move this little box around. You can change its configuration by taking your cursor and kind of just moving it around. And so if if it's in the way, or if you want to make the screen, the actual presentation larger, you can move things around and enrich your viewing experience. We also have a live transcription service, so you can turn that on. And so if you're having trouble hearing or making out, usually I'm pretty loud so you can hear me, but if somebody had an interesting accent or something, you might want to tune into that. And it works really well, except for some particular Native American place names or names of people, or some of the technical jargon that we sometimes throw in as archaeologists, but it does a really great job. There also is the option to post questions to Lydia, and so she has said that she would like her questions at the end of the presentation, so there'll be some time for that. But if you don't want to forget them, you want to get them in there, we'll be taking kind of a tally and trying to figure out the most appropriate questions. Maybe not like what's your favorite vacation spot, but so you can see on the right here, there's some options: chat, raise hand, but the Q&A. So if you click on that, it's usually at the bottom of your screen. You can type your question in, and we'll do our best to try to get to as many of those as we can at the end of the talk. If you're having trouble with the live stream via Zoom, you can also tune into our live stream service on Facebook. And basically, I think there's like a second delay or something, if that, and you can see Lydia talking to us live. And that's another great option. You can also then subscribe to us on YouTube. This presentation, probably within about a day or so, our guru of the webinars, Taylor Hasbrook, is able to publish these on YouTube, and so you can come back and see that again and again and again, or you can also do that on Facebook. So make sure you pursue those options if you're interested. So Crow Canyon is we're sponsoring this webinar series, and we're a nonprofit located in southwestern Colorado in Cortez, And our mission is to empower present and future generations by making the human past accessible and relevant through archaeological research, experiential education, and American Indian knowledge. And you can get more information on Crow Canyon by going to our website at crowcanyon.org. And it's full of all sorts of interesting research and education and Native American initiative material. And you can navigate that and get more information. And, you know, we have a lot of programs, both educational and archaeological and otherwise. And so you could figure out how you can come and join us in Southwestern Colorado if you so desire. So before we get started, I really want to acknowledge, you know, Crow Canyon acknowledges that the Pueblo, Ute, Paiute, Dene, and Hickory Apache are the people who lived on this land. And these are the people whose traditional homelands this institution sits and upon which we work and reside. Our mission-related work would not be possible without Indigenous people in the past, present, and future. And we respectfully recognize and honor the ancestral, descendant, Indigenous communities for their contributions to all humankind. And Crow Canyon is grateful for all Indigenous people and supports the preservation and protection of cultural traditions, ancestral connections, and sacred lands. So, you know, that being said, you know, we like to use that kind of as a moment just to pause and think about, you know, no matter where you are in the United States or North American continent, you're sitting on lands that either are or were once belonged to Indigenous peoples. So we like to acknowledge that that we're really grateful for all those peoples. Next week we have, and in the following weeks, we have some upcoming webinars as part of our webinar series. So next week we have Beyond Maize, Beans, and Squash with Dr. Michael Mathiowicz. That's Thursday, April 29th at 4 p.m. Tune in for that. It should be a really interesting presentation. And then the week after that, on May 6th, we have Sophisticated Rebels, Insurgent Archaeologies in the American Southwest with Dr. Louis Bork. And I can tell you, Louis is a really incredibly intelligent guy, a good friend and colleague from the University of Arizona. And he's now teaching in New Mexico and just doing really incredible things. He's done a lot of work with Guyana and the Salado, and we'll have to tune in to see what other types of interesting things he's looking at. So over the last year, as we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic has been really, really difficult. And of course, some gems have come out of it in terms of opportunities like this webinar right now, but it's been really hard for everybody, but particularly for Indigenous communities. And we just like to remind people that you can make a difference by donating to some of the various relief funds that the different Pueblos and tribes have set up. So for example, the Pueblo Relief Fund, the Hopi Relief Fund, the Navajo and Hopi Families COVID Relief Fund, and the official Navajo Nation COVID-19 Relief Fund are all great organizations. So you can tune back into the webinar on Facebook or YouTube to kind of see these websites later on, or in your local area, look up Indigenous and tribal communities where you might be able to make a difference and help folks get through this really difficult time. So then I want to move on to our main event for this evening, of course. If I can get my screen to work, there we go. So our presentation this evening, again, is called A Jaunt Through Time, A Cultural Context of Southeastern Utah. And it's going to be presented by my friend and colleague, Lydia Dehaven. And just to give you a little background on Lydia, she's an archaeologist and cultural resource manager focused on public land management in the Four Corners region. She's currently the archaeologist for the Bureau of Land Management Monticello Field Office, which covers 1.9 million acres in San Juan County, Utah. Now, Lydia is originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and received her undergraduate degree from the University of Kansas, and then later received her master's degree from Indiana University of Pennsylvania in applied archaeology. And there she focused on remote sensing and geographic information systems, or GIS. And she spent the last 8 years working in the Southwest, primarily in the Mesa Verde region for the private and federal sectors. And I just have to add, she was also once a Crow Canyon intern. And we're all very proud of all the incredible accomplishments that she's made in the last 8 years. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, Lydia, and thanks for all our viewers out there joining us from internet land. And we're excited for this great presentation, which again is entitled A Jaunt Through Time, Cultural Context of Southeastern Utah. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and let Lydia share hers, and we'll let her take it away. Thanks for coming, Lydia.
Thanks so much, Ben. Hi, everybody. Like Ben said, my name is Lydia Dehaven, and I'm an archaeologist in Southeast Utah. It's a true pleasure to be with you tonight. And what I wanted to do, and what we thought we could do this evening, is kind of give you a cultural context for the land that I manage, so that you'd have knowledge for some upcoming lectures in the series, and also some understanding of the complexity of the cultural resources in the region. So before we start doing our time traveling, and I'm going to probably throw a lot of information at you quickly about 12,000 years of human history in the area. So buckle in. I wanted to give you a little context of where we are. The Monticello Field Office and Bears Ears National Monument, as many of you know, is located in mostly San Juan County in southeastern Utah. So that is kind of in the Four Corners area. It's a large landmass with a dense cultural history. We have about 34,000 recorded sites right now, and that's with 10% inventory. And for all the non-archaeologists out there, 10% inventory means that that's 10% of the land that's actually been surveyed and where we know where the sites are. And so this is some of the densest cultural resources in America, and a thriving prehistoric civilization. All right, so let's jump right on into it. We're gonna start with the Paleo Indian period, which is what the earliest known time when people came into the Americas. And these terms that I'm using, like Paleo Indian period, these are terms that archaeologists have used to define time periods where there are trends and like social, cultural, material culture. So what we're gonna do is give you an idea of what these sites look like on the ground, what kind of things were left behind, and what's really out there on the landscape. So in the Paleo Indian period, so imagine this is like 13,000 years ago. Temperatures are getting a bit warmer, so some of the ice is melting. People are able to come over to America via land masses and water. And this is a time when people are living in small groups. They're hunter and gathering, like bands that are moving across the region. And most of the material culture from this time period is going to be lithic tools. And the earliest known lithic tool is the Clovis Point, and we do have some that have been found in southeast Utah. This is a time also where, since people are moving, there's not so much stylization in specific regions. So these points are pretty much ubiquitous from Canada all the way down to Mexico. So during this time in southeast Utah, it's actually, although it is getting warmer, it's actually a cooler and wetter environment than it is today. So it's not quite the desert scene. It's actually almost like subalpine. There's, you know, Douglas firs and blue spurs. A lot of the canyons that many of you are probably familiar with had like running water and really reliable seeps. And there was also like megafauna in the area. This is like your childhood dreams of ground sloths and mammoths possibly, and camels and giant bears. But basically in this field office, one of the best known sites from the Paleo Indian is the Lime Ridge site, which is southeast of Comb Ridge. And in this slide, it's on, point A, or point B, sorry, is from that site. And this site was probably, there was about 300 artifacts collected from it, and they've all been kind of analyzed. There's a lot of local material, and it was more of like a tool replenishing area. So when people were on the move, they'd stop there. And these points are like highly, they're hard to make. They're usually with specialized material. The points following the Clovis Point, the Folsom points, are arguably some of the hardest to make. And these have like fluted areas up the center, and are typically, we do have some found in our area. But anyway, I wanted to bring up this period because we actually have sort of a resurgence of research going on, or not even a resurgence, a start of research happening in the Paleo Indian period here, because Fort Lewis College professor, Dr. Jesse Toon, has recently been going through collections all over the area and working on some of the points. And what he's kind of found is that there's actually a lot of movement in the Colorado Plateau of people coming from the plains and the Great Basin and up from the south, and that they're really learning to use and utilize this area quickly, and that there's going to be future research focused on how people have interacted with this landscape in the Paleo Indian period. But unfortunately, it's sort of a period that gets glossed over in my office, just because the later prehistoric sites get so much attention. So one thing that really needs to happen is like more survey and information just gathered on this time period in general. So moving forward, the climate in the Archaic period starts to be a lot warmer and drier. And people are moving and shaking during this period still, but we have some big changes. Like we have the development of the Atlatl, which there's some photos on this slide here, which is like a throwing spear. This gave people a lot more force and better ability to hunt. And then people are, they're kind of messing around with plants. Like people are testing out the landscape and we have some of the first like cultivation of plants. And you may find some technologies for plant processing, like small one-handed monos, which is like a rock used to grind up plants or corn later on. And there's kind of like two styles developing during the Archaic period. Like we have like a style on the Colorado Plateau, but there's also like an Archaic period style in Southern Arizona that's developing. And those people are theorized to have moved up north and brought some language and tradition and agriculture with them. During this time, like when we see these resources on the ground, what we typically find are lithic scatters. So like in this photo here, you're gonna find some chipstones and different types of flakes and projectile points. But one thing that starts to happen is that people aren't moving so much and their landscape is smaller. And when that happens, they become more specialized. So now instead of having more like ubiquitous points, we have things that tell us specifically about a group of people. We have the development of like specialized projectile points like Elko corner notch, northern side notch, sudden side notch, Pinto, Bajada points. There's an Elko point in this photo. And then we also, another characteristic of this time period throughout Southeast Utah is the Archaic Rock Art. This site shown here in Grand Gulch, you can see a lot of the classic Archaic Rock Art imagery. We've got like just geometric design, sort of simplified people and humans. And then we also have a different rock art style that archaeologists call Glen Canyon linear style. And this style is essentially just anthropomorphs and animals that, as you can see in this photo, they're outlined, and then they typically have lines within their within the body. So moving forward, at the end of the Archaic period, corn starts to really pop up, which is super cool and a big turning point. But you may be wondering, you know, why are we jumping into Basket Maker 2? What happened to Basket Maker 1? Well, just like a fun archaeology side note, Basket Maker 1 was, we don't have one because when early archaeologists got together to develop the Pecos classification system, which is what I'll be talking about moving forward, in 1927, they thought there was going to be a more distinct, line between the Basket Maker Archaic and Basket Maker 2. So they sort of reserved that for Basket Maker 1. And unfortunately, that hasn't really developed. So we just go right into Basket Maker 2 as far as archaeology terms are concerned. So during Basket Maker 2 times, we have a lot more happening in the area. So we kind of have two different groups that have developed. We have the Western Basket Maker, which is in Southeast Utah. That includes possibly some of those groups that immigrated from Arizona. It includes Cottonwood Wash. There's a lot around Grand Gulch and on Cedar Mesa. And then we also have the Eastern Basket Maker, which is in the La Plata and Animas River area. Excuse me. And then there's not too much like happening in between in the Mesa Verde region. It's sort of like these two groups. They had different artifacts, house styles. It's theorized that they spoke different languages. And there's some evidence there could have been conflict between the two. So during this time as well, you have that trend of like a decrease in mobility. So people aren't moving around so much. They're really working on more development of agriculture. There's no ceramics during this time, and people are cooking corn and squash with like pitched baskets and hot stones. And when you see sites from this period, what you kind of see are these like ephemeral rock scatters with some burnt limestone. And you're like, why the burnt limestone? Well, it's like the limestone actually would help release the lysine, which is like an essential amino acid from the corn when you're cooking. So it helps make it more protein rich and more of it gives you more of those essential amino acids that are so badly needed. And so that's just kind of a thing you see with the Basket Maker 2 sites. At this time, people are living in pit houses. So kind of going from more in the Archaic, utilizing shelters and having sort of like easy take up, take down, like almost teepee style homes to a more sedentary system. But these are still like shallow pit houses. I have in this plan map here, you'll see this is what like a pit house, a Basket Maker 2 pit house typically looks like. And there's one key indicator of these are these entryways, these slab line entryways. And you'll see these on top of Cedar Mesa, some of them like still standing up and intact. And this is one site, the Vera site that was excavated by Bill Leip and R.G. Matson as part of the Cedar Mesa project. They excavated 2 other sites as well. But really, there hasn't been like a ton of excavation on the field office. There has been some research, but not a ton of excavation. Most of the excavation are those sites. There's been some There was another excavation for the Glen Canyon project, also for some of the Highway 95 alignments, and some salvage projects in the 70s by University of Utah. But so this is a good example of, you know, what these sites look like when they've been excavated. And it's typical to find, you know, a hearth in the center, deflector walls, and then several cysts per pit house that that would have been used for storage outside of the main living area. But I wanted to put these photos up to give you an idea of what these sites can look like on the ground. So the bottom photo is actually of one of these sites on Cedar Mesa, where it's just a diffuse rock scatter, and I mean, and then some burnt limestone, and there's some lithics, but like I said, there's no ceramics, so that's another like telltale that you're probably in an earlier site, because there hasn't been this development of ceramic technology yet. And then the other photo is of Boomerang Shelter, which has been partially excavated. But you can see once again that it's it really looks sort of just like an open area with rocks. If there was a close up of that, you would see some of those rocks standing up for cysts. So during this time too, we have some evidence of like domesticated turkeys, but we mostly for feather procurement, not necessarily for eating. And we also have evidence, some recent research that was done on 2 beetle necklace fragments from this excavation that have been dated to the basket maker time. So moving on, whenever we differentiate these time periods, it's typically because there's some large social change. And Basket Maker 3 in Southeast Utah was a time of rapid population growth. There's people immigrating to the area. There's an intensification of people living together in more villages instead of like smaller groups. That people are clustering around community farms. And then we have the development of some like big technologies, like really big technologies. Like I'm talking iPhone like 15.2. We've got the bow and arrow, which is takes hunting to the next level. Like now you can have force, you can be further away, and it just increases accuracy. We also have the domestication of beans, which is a huge source for humans, having that protein. And then along with that is the starting of pottery production, which I don't know if any of you guys have ever boiled beans from being rock hard to edible, but it takes a lot of effort. And so no longer is it really viable to use those earlier methods of like using pitched baskets and things to cook your food. So that leads to the development of, or those go hand in hand with the development of ceramics. But what's great in this time and with the boom, it's like those groups that I talked to you about before, the Eastern and Western groups, it's like they're more coming together and filling out the area. So you have the development of communal spaces for the first time in the form of what we call great kivas, which kivas are subterranean rooms that have domestic and ceremonial uses. And great kivas are super great because they're bigger. And they can be up to like 100 square meters, extremely large areas. And they're a place where you could bring people together. So when you have these 2 groups that are living in the same area, it's perhaps that these were communal places that were used to unify the area. In addition, there's change in the housing. So instead of having these shallow pit houses, it changes into these larger pit houses that are dug into the ground, like 1 to 3 meters. And instead of that slab line entryway that we talked about before, you have what archaeologists call antechambers, which is just sort of like a foyer or an entryway. Like you might have to your house, a smaller place where you could store things. And before you go into the larger space. And then these would typically be dug down and have wood beams and thatching. These are, again, still have at times sort of an ephemeral surface scatter. It depends. Sometimes places on our field office, like Cedar Mesa, where we get so much wind-blown soil, you can have meters of soil and see very little on the surface. But, you know, in these photos, the bottom left photo with the rocks, that's the remnants of a storage cyst. So there'd be the pit houses and then multiple storage cysts around that. And then, you know, like I talked about before, we have the ceramics. And so these ceramics, the main ceramics during this time period are, you know, Chapin graywares and Chapin black on white. And these are thin ceramics, and the ceramics with painted design on them are typically, they're like floating designs, as you can see in this photo. They don't necessarily take up all of the negative space. And they can have these like Z symbols or like sort of floating kite symbols on them. And then another big thing on the Monticello field office and with the basket maker time period, which I did forget to mention, they did make beautiful baskets, if you've been wondering this all this time. And I'm sure many of you are aware of the Cedar Mesa Perishables project led by Lori Webster, and I would highly recommend checking that out to see some of those amazing perishable items. A lot of what I'm focusing on tonight are things that if you were out on the ground, are things you could see and you could relate to specific cultural periods. But anyway, so the basket maker rock art is extremely iconic in this area, particularly like the San Juan anthropomorphic style, which this diagram shows a variety of those. And so these are large anthropomorphs, or figures of humans, typically with broad shoulders and sort of a stiffer upper body. And then they will have some type of head adornment or like lines, things like this. And I wanted to show you, I wanted to show you just, this is the Kachina panel by the San Juan River. And I just wanted to give some people that aren't from the area an idea of what these look like. So that's where the panel is. And then here's a close-up of it. And, you know, you can see that this panel is highly visible from the river, from further away. And I noticed in our field office, you know, we have some panels that are meant for the public to see and are easy to see. And then we have other panels and things that are more private or for specific people. But this is one that's like big and bold and sort of has become iconic in the area and the representative of the style, which you can find throughout. So moving forward, you know, at the end of the Basket Maker 3 period, there is a bit of like a hiatus from like 700 to 750 in the area. And then also it just kind of cools down during the Pueblo I. Like there's some areas, which I'll talk about in a little bit, that do pick up and have some large villages, but for the most part during the Pueblo I, A lot of what I'm going to be talking about is happening regionally, but not necessarily intensely developing within the Southeast Utah region. So, but it is happening a lot in Colorado. So during the Pueblo I, we have, larger settlements with many neighbors, and we have this transition from being in pit houses to moving to above ground architecture. So the architecture that you start to see are sort of like slab lined rectangular room blocks with multiple rooms, with typically like sort of, they can have a plaza in front of them or a couple pit houses in front of them. And then like an intensification of like a midden area, which middens are what the term we use for the area where people discarded trash and different things on the sites. And this is when people are, they're living with more people, they're living in large groups. There's, you'll notice it's a continued trend of, let's settle down, let's farm, let's join together. And so this trend just continues through this time period. But we don't have full like masonry above ground structures. There's sort of a trend, and it's like a combination of Hakal architecture, which you can see in the kiva in the bottom corner in the back, where you have those sticks that are standing straight up with mud in them, combined with some stone masonry. And one of the really cool things that starts during the Pueblo I period is the production of redware. So redwares, San Juan redwares start to be produced around 750 and continue to be produced till about 1050, with I think the height of production is around 800. So still during the Pueblo I period. And they're really only made in Southeast Utah, but they show up and are traded all throughout the Four Corners region, and even some evidence further out to like Nevada. So it's a unique piece of ceramic to this area that also has been had a lot of research in how trade and manufacturing has happened throughout the Four Corners region. So like in this photo, I have a picture of the Bajo red on orange and a bluff black on red ceramic there. And, this is also a time when people like, their Chaco is like towards the end of this Chaco Canyon in New Mexico is like popping up and becoming a big cultural center. And people are moving towards that. There's sort of a warmer, drier period around there as well. So as things transition and we move into the Pueblo II, the Pueblo II comes back into the area pretty hard, whereas during the previous period, there was, I forgot to mention, there are some large Pueblo I sites like over on Alkali Ridge and in Montezuma Canyon. So sort of in the eastern portion of Southeast Utah, but there really aren't those same large villages continuing throughout the field office. But during this period, things start to pick up more, and there's more increase in population and demographic and organization throughout the landscape. So at this point, we have, Chaco Canyon, like I mentioned before, has really become like the cultural center. And in Southeast Utah, we have multiple Chacoan outliers that include the northernmost Chacoan outliers. So on Cedar Mesa, we have 3 Chaco Great Houses et al. ON and HST, where there's the Cottonwood and Bluff Great House, the Great House behind the edge of the Cedars, and then numerous Chacoan roads and shrines throughout the area. And so there's a lot of connection and importance there. And when I say Great House, what I'm talking about is a large multi-story space with a specific reason, not necessarily a habitation place, but a place for trade or specific people, and more like a continuation of those large community centers. There's some other really big changes during this time that you can tell archaeologically when you're out on the ground just through the ceramics. We have a change in the black and white ceramics, where Cortez black and white, Magus black and white ceramics start being developed and made. The ceramics are getting a little bit, they're getting thicker with more slip and more design. Whereas before, when we talked about the basket maker ceramics, we were talking about how there was a lot of negative space, and now there's a lot more space filled and a lot more focus on continuing geometric design. And so like some of these photos in the bottom corner, those like have some of the classic sort of Magus black on white ceramic depictions that are hatchery or checkerboard patterns that will continue. And then you'll find that the rims, like one way to tell what the ceramic dates to is by looking at the rim. There'll be sort of a rounded tapered rim instead of like the earlier, like very thin rims. And then another thing that starts to be developed in the Pueblo II is corrugated ceramics. So which sort of just replaced the utilitarian ware, the gray wares. And there's been some research and theories on the corrugated ceramics that they're actually, if you think of like an oven coil and how that distributes heat, think of how this corrugation as that and how that could help distribute heat without, with keeping the vessel strong. So we did talk some about the great houses and the Chacoan influence, but just the normal homes during this time also start to change, where you go from having, like I was saying before, the room block with the uprights and the hukal to like one-story completely stone masonry homes. With now you see that the pit houses have truly become these Kivas spaces, and then middens in front of them. You'll see these scattered throughout the region, these Pruden units. And another just really interesting thing that starts to happen during the late Pueblo II is that basically between like 1000 to 1100, there's this period of reliable precipitation, which, as all of us desert dwellers know, rain and water is life and everything. So this leads to some people from the Cayenne region coming north across the San Juan River and into the area and influencing the area. And when I say the Cayenne region, archaeologists have denoted these cultural regions based on similarities in architectural style and artifacts and dating. So Southeast Utah is mostly in the Mesa Verde region, but when you get over to Cedar Mesa and further west, you sort of have this transitional zone between this other group of people, which makes it pretty interesting. So during the late P2, there's sort of this intensification or surge of these Cayenne ceramics that could be associated with people migrating from the south into the area. And then you also start to see that in different architectural styles throughout the area. You know, the Cayenne culture sort of have like a more reliance on Hakal masonry, like we talked about before. So you'll find habitation rooms that are like partially Hakal, partially stone built, with like a partial Hakal stone built storage room, and sort of like a mishmash of architectural styles. I think the best way to say it seems a lot more like flexible than some of like Mesa Verde styles, and utilizes maybe some faster or whatever is really available. The Kivas they can be square. There's like more flexibility in those designs as well, where they can be square, circular, and some are above ground, and some are not. So you see this influence of this other culture over in the western part of the field office. And then moving on to the Pueblo III, this is sort of like the height of people living. This is like everyone left their small town and they moved into the city, and you have people living in large pueblos. We see shifts from people, they're living in small homes to large community centers. There's evidence of these sites on the mesa tops and the canyon settings throughout the field office. There is this shift to move, a lot of sites move to alcoves and more are areas that surround water. And then you have the development of some different pottery styles, like these photos have some Mesa Verde black on white sherds, which are, they're very thick and they have extremely well-defined bands around them, and a flat, thick rim with ticking on it. This is like one interesting thing, I think, in a lot of Western mines, you go from thin pottery is like the most refined pottery, but the Pueblo ceramics starts, like we think porcelain. The Pueblo ceramics starts thin and gets thicker as it develops, and then it gets these more elaborate designs on it. So towards the end of this period, this is also when we start to see towers, tower to kiva combinations. This is, people are completely reliant mostly reliant on farming. And then you start to also see, I guess some people call it defensive, but I've been calling it, from what I see a lot of the time, compelling architecture, where maybe it's like you enter a space a specific way, just like how you would walk through like an airport kiosk line a specific way. You'll find these sort of like small walls that I think for a long time people have called them defensive, but I'm going to call them compelling for now. But anywho, and then towards the end of the Pueblo III period, there's a lot going on. There's a big drought from 1276 to like 1299, and there's theorized to be some food shortages, potential social conflict, and a lot of the people that lived up here already had connections to people in the South or connections to the South, and so sort of towards the end of this period, people leave the region and migrate back down south. We don't have any like Pueblo IV sites. Everyone has migrated down south by this period, but we do have evidence of people during this time coming back up to the region. We've found ceramics and Hopi yellowware from the area in certain places that have been left by people coming back and paying tribute. And then here's a slide that wraps up a lot of history really quickly, but for the sake of time, my apologies. So the historic period, we have a lot of evidence of Ute and Navajo throughout the field office. We have rock art, we have wiki-ups, hogans, we have TP rings, Ute TP rings, that there's been some new research on that, and is sort of like another overlooked aspect, like the Paleo Indian period, where people get distracted by more of the Puebloan things. And then we also have some big historic things going on here too, with exploration by Western exploration, the hole in the rock trail that goes from Escalante to Bluff by Mormon pioneers in 1879 runs all the way through the field office. There's historic mining, ranching. We actually have quite a few CCC and FDR New Deal features throughout the field office. This is a CCC dam in this period, and there's a lot of like water control features. So I really hope you enjoyed time traveling with me. I know that was a lot really quickly, but I do really quickly want to tell you about some of the cool projects we have going on your public lands, because this is what your taxpayer dollars support, and it's exciting. So I'm just going to do this real quick, but we have an ethnographic study that started through an assistance agreement with the Living Heritage Research Council. We have just started kicked this back up, and we're initiating a consultation with the affiliated tribes to see who wants to be involved, and planning scoping trips. And this is going to take several years to create an ethnography for the region. We're also working with Friends of Cedar Mesa on the World Monuments Fund, because they got a World Monuments Fund grant to create sort of 3 focal points on the field office, one at Mule Canyon Roadside Pueblo, and Newspaper Rock, and one down by the San Juan River at Sand Island. And we're just sort of in the designing phase of that. We also developed this, an assistance agreement with Edge of the Cedars to support more lectures. So here I am, the first one, and then there's a bunch more coming. So, and thank you again to Crow Canyon. We have our site stewards and ambassadors, who is also run through the Edge of the Cedars, and the Utah SHPO is taking over management of that. But Mike Wingert's our site steward coordinator if you're interested in being a steward or ambassador, and here's us doing a volunteer project. We also support a multi-year assistance agreement for an ethnographic or ethnobotany study, looking at plants at different archaeological sites, and that's been in the makes for a few years. And there's going to be a talk on that coming, I think, in October. So that should be really great. Try to catch that one. We also have a partnership with SciArc Digital Documentation. They're doing digital documentation of House on Fire and Mule Canyon Roadside at Pueblo, that we hope to use to develop interpretive material and do tribal consultation, and also just have like really high quality condition assessment of these sites. We started a kind of a one of its kind of assistance agreement with the Ute Mountain Ute tribe that is focused on supporting youth and elder trips to the field office to visit the landscape and to visit cultural resources. And then we are supporting Ben doing and his partnership with University of Arizona doing digital documentation as well as ethnographic research on Moon House, which is going to be a really exciting project. We're in the very beginning process of working with Friends of Cedar Mesa, as well as the Colorado and Utah SHPOs, to develop a context document to summarize the prehistory why it's important of this area. And that's going to be multi-state and include the boundary in the north will be the Dolores River boundary. To the east will be the La Platas and Menifee Mountains and the Mesa Verde Escarpment, and then the San Juan River and Comb Ridge. So it's a huge cultural area, so much going on. We don't really have a good context to document that can be used by researchers and land managers to help us make determinations of eligibility, to help us preserve things. And so this is a really exciting project that it's going to take a while, but it's starting. We've also been in the process of redoing the cultural resource recreation management plan. So eventually that will go out to public comment and includes BENM and Cedar Mesa. So, and then we also do some volunteer projects. I got these graffiti removal gurus that help me get rid of some spray paint on this truck in Valley of the Gods. We did this like a couple weeks ago and it was pretty amazing. But anyway, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to Crow Canyon, and thank you to everyone for listening, and thanks for everyone's interest in public lands. And this is my contact if you need it, and I can take any questions.
Great. Here I come. Hold on a sec, Lydia. There we go. Hey, great job. Wow, that was really interesting.
Ooh, my mouth is so dry.
Yeah. Well, it's that time of year too. So why don't you leave your slides up in case some of the questions you might be able to address them with specific slides. Yeah. So we had a bunch of great questions. Let's see here. Where to start? Well, let's see. Let's go with one that might just be a quick answer. But what period would Moonhouse be?
Moonhouse is Pueblo II to Pueblo III, but there are some earlier occupations within that as well.
Nice. Okay, this one's a little more hardball.
Oh no.
I can start off with the easy ones there. So let's see. I am curious to know if there are any current day excavations taking place, and then how often are artifacts being collected by archaeologists who study, date, preserve them, and do they eventually end up in museums, or are they given to tribes?
Oh, this is an excellent question. So the BLM we really don't excavate unless it was like an emergency situation, which is not happening. There are no excavations currently going on BLM land in Southeast Utah. There are some excavations going on Sitla and some private land but they're mostly salvage related too, like coal beds, which is a huge site in Montezuma Canyon. It has like piping erosion, and so there's features and things that are being like undercut and literally like dropping into a wash. So that's most of the excavation I can think of. And I know Fumi's is doing some research around there as well. As far as artifact collection, we try not to collect artifacts. Many of the tribes have told us they do not want artifacts removed from the area. If we can leave things in place, cover them in place, that's what we try to do. It becomes really tricky because I think the internet is archaeology's worst enemy right now. The looters of the days of yore, where you think of someone with a shovel going around, are gone, and now we have YouTube stars who are putting a lot of sensitive information online. So there will be a few things I'm going to be looking into potentially collecting coming up, but it will all be also with tribal consultation, and that's it's ultimately tribe's decision. I'm going to follow their wishes. So did I answer all the parts of that?
I think so. No, that was great. Yeah, no, there's a lot to that question. Sorry.
That was a great question.
Yeah, no, that's exactly. So what is the BLM policy or the Monticello Field Office on site stabilization? Do you have stabilized sites, or do you let them degrade naturally, or how do you make that choice?
Okay, no, I love these questions. They're like land management questions. We don't currently have like a policy where it's like if A happens, then we're going to do B, C, and D. So it's sort of a case by case scenario. I can say that this is another situation where it's really heavily, we hope to have it be more heavily reliant on tribal consultation. And we have heard that many tribes do not want us to be stabilizing sites, that they would like them to live their lifespan, because these places to many groups are still living. So it's part of their life cycle to erode and go back into the earth. One thing we haven't done any major stabilization projects since I've been here. We've done some repair on like Mule Canyon, Roadside Pueblo, and 3 Kiva, which are excavated and stabilized. They were excavated, one was from the highway salvage, and the 3 Kiva, I think, it's been a while. But they are like front country sort of sites that we tell people about and people visit. And so they've been stabilized as part of that interpretive and sort of education experience. They're places where people can visit and cause really little damage. I am interested in pursuing just more backfill as stabilization, whereas I recognize that people are walking in areas which causes like the dirt to move and can cause things to kick up. So I think a happy medium will be more like just backfilling rather than like stopping walls to collapse. But once again, it will all go, like all of that goes through NEPA process and consultation.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's probably a big part of what you have to get to work on every day. So maybe now a more archaeological oriented question.
Okay.
So what do you attribute, I mean, in terms of cultural history, what do you attribute rapid population decline after the peak? So if the peak said 1200 and the population decline is at before 1300, what do you attribute to that?
You know, I think like most things, it's not just like one thing. I mean, I definitely think a lot of environmental factors, you know, drought. We live in, it's just such an arid region where we are so heavily reliant on, you know, monsoons and unpredictable rain cycles, drought, lack of resource, probably some change in social behavior. And then I think also one thing we don't think about when we see these, well, and I say we, I say, you know, I'm an American non-Indigenous person. When I see these structures that are made of stone, I sort of get that like brick house idea in my head where it's like, this is the house your grandma lived in, and for 5 generations nobody left. But I think people are still moving around and very well connected to other areas. So when things started to get bad, there was connections to move elsewhere, and there's also a tradition of movement.
Oh, that's interesting, and that sounds what I've been hearing too. So yeah, right on. Let's see here. Well, and so another question, and this might be what kind of megafauna might have lived in this part of Southeast Utah, and when did they die out?
Well,
some of the main ones.
I don't have the exact date, unfortunately. I will say that I fall under the bias of not being a Paleo Indian expert in this cultural region. So I'm super stoked to have a Paleo Indian expert come in. I mean, what I've read is that they believe there was likely ground sloths and mammoths and giant bear in this area. And then, I mean, really when they die out is more in that transition to the Archaic period, which is something I forgot to mention, because those sources are gone. There's an environmental change, and then those sources are gone when people stop moving so much. And
Right. Yeah, no, well, you answered that perfectly. Yeah, I always try to imagine out there the mammoths walking around, or snuggling up in an alcove with giant ground sloth. Let's see here. Another one. So I don't want to keep you for too long. So you mind just a couple more questions?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. All right. Cool. So which tribes do you most often consult with, and could you tell us just generally about that process, maybe?
Yeah, I can tell you about tribal consultation for sure. So we consult with 32 tribes that are culturally affiliated to this region. As you can imagine, I mean, it's just with this many cultural resources, there's just a lot of people that are strongly connected here. Hopi, Zuni, Akaba, Navajo, Ute. We affiliate with, we consult with all of the Pueblo groups, and even a Pueblo group in Texas, the Apache. So it's quite a list. Tribal consultation is a government to government procedure. You can almost even think of it as when you consult, or when someone from the United States government would talk to someone from another country like Canada or something. There are policies and procedures in place and timelines that we follow. So when we have a project that's initiated, we'll reach out to the tribes and see who's interested. And if it's something, we'll just keep it as simple, because like everything in archaeology, and it depends on the project and what's there or whatever. But if, say that there's a project to put in a small trail or something, we're going to see what cultural resources are there, usually by foot survey, recording those sites, completing the section as part of the Section 106 process. And then we're going to make a determination of effects. So there might not be any sites there. There might be like one site that we ended up recording, but it's on the outside of the project. And then we'll take that information and also like give that to the tribes. Like, we did this, there's X here, there's a determination of no adverse effect. We'd like you to comment. We try to get comments on like the area of potential effect, like where a project's going to happen, the determination of effects, and if it went into any type of adverse effect, which it normally doesn't. So that will be meetings, letters, meetings, phone calls. And once we initiate that consultation, they have 30 days to initially respond, and then we can move on from there. So it's if they respond and say we want consultation, then that time will, depending and what's happening. And we now have a oh my goodness, I always want to say tribal liaison officer from the Forest Service, but tribal coordinator in our office, Shirley Cloud Lane, and she started about 10 months ago. So she's handling a lot of that too, which is great.
Great. Yeah, that's an interesting process for sure. It sounds like, yeah, you've got it pretty well figured out. It's great to have folks like you around, doing my own work in the area, I know it's a pretty complicated process sometimes. So it's great that, you know, folks like you can help us navigate through that. Let's see, maybe just one or two more questions. Relating to agriculture, did maize, when maize was first introduced, was it accompanied by other products, right? Other agricultural products at that time? Let's see here. And then just what's the evidence for that, I guess, for that or other crops?
Well, when maize was introduced, like all the agriculture started coming in from the south of us, and when it was introduced at sort of towards the end of the Archaic period, beginning like basket maker, it was quickly followed by like squash, and then there's sort of a break in that before beans come into play. And I would think a lot of that would have come from trade, travel, and just experimentation.
Right, great. So then one really important one, what do you see as the greatest threat to these resources?
That's a really good question. I think the greatest threat to these resources is it's the recreation, the public making the popularity of the area toppled with just lack of support to back up to meet that need for the amount of recreation that we have.
I guess that's kind of a loaded question, sir. I'm not trying to put you on the spot with that one.
No, it's okay. I think about it too often.
Right. I'm right there with you. So let's see here. Maybe just one or two more questions, but is there technologies that you can talk about that might help prevent looting at sites like this, or types of, I don't want you to give away all the keys to the kingdom, but you know, how are you guys, what can you tell us about trying to solve that issue?
I can say that it's very difficult to be proactive in with the situation that I'm in, having all of these resources and with limited funding and staffing, and that there have been people in the past that have tried using game cams and things like that. It really hasn't been successful. I think some things that we're working on that will probably help are unified education messages, but really to treat such a dense of a cultural area, it's such a large landscape. The best thing to prevent it would be more funding and more people.
Right, and you had mentioned the site steward program, right? Is that?
Yeah, yeah. So and we do have our site stewards, and they are, you know, I thank them until I make them blush. So, you know, the site stewards, the site ambassadors, which the site ambassadors, they'll like hang out at the site for a day and talk to people and kind of like give them site visitation messaging. And those are like indispensable resources. But I mean, I can't really think of a technology that would help. It can be frustrating because so many things are put online now and you really see the results of that. And there's not any really like legal ramifications for a lot of that. So.
Right. So do you guys need more site stewards and site ambassadors?
Yeah, if anyone's interested, they can email me and I can pass on their information. And I know there can be a little bit of a wait just because of, you know, it's we can only manage so many as well. But actually now that we're partnering with the SHPO, they're actually willing to help us have more. So it would be a really good time if you're, my contact's right there. So feel free to bother me.
Great. Well, hopefully, yeah, that's such an important program, both in field office, Monticello field office, and in the greater region. We encourage that everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So I think that pretty much wraps up most of the questions. I mean, there were several others, but I think we're really running out of time. So I think if anybody has any additional questions, they can either channel them to us at Crow Canyon and we can filter those and send them to you, or you put your contact info up here. But I just want to say thanks so much for joining us, Lydia, and sharing all the incredible information that you have and your experience in this area that, you know, I know and love as well. So I really appreciate you doing such incredible work out there, both for this and just in general. So again, you know, thank you all for tuning in. And Lydia, do you have any closing thoughts for us?
I want to thank everyone for their interest. And I really want to say hello to all of my family who lives far away from me, and that we're able to see what the heck an archaeologist does. And I'm happy for any of you that made it on here, and I'm thinking of you.
Great. All right. Well, thanks so much again, Lydia. And for all of you out there in internet land, tune in next Thursday. We'll have another exciting webinar, and then Thursdays to follow. Thanks.
All right.